Tonight, I want to explore something that many people rarely notice. Not because it is impossible to see, but because people with avoidant patterns often become very skilled at hiding what is happening beneath the surface. From what many therapists and researchers have observed, emotional distance does not always mean emotional peace. Sometimes the moment an avoidant person believes they have escaped emotional discomfort is actually the beginning of a much quieter internal struggle. Relationships between someone with strong avoidant tendencies and someone who is deeply empathetic often create a difficult emotional balance. One person naturally absorbs feelings, reflects on them, and looks for understanding. The other often manages stress by pulling away, minimizing emotion, or creating distance whenever closeness begins to feel overwhelming. At first, these differences can seem to complement each other. One offers warmth while the other offers independence. One reaches closer while the other steps back. For a while, it can feel like the relationship somehow works, despite these opposite approaches. But over time, those differences often become the source of increasing pain. The empathetic partner gives patience, compassion, reassurance, and repeated opportunities to reconnect. Meanwhile, the avoidant partner may continue withdrawing whenever vulnerability feels too intense. This pattern can continue for months or even years until something quietly changes. Stay with me, because this next part explains why that turning point can feel so unexpected for both people. Many people assume the avoidant partner is fully in control because they appear calm and emotionally detached. Yet emotional distance is not always the same as emotional stability. Sometimes what looks like control is actually a strategy for managing uncomfortable feelings. While the empathetic partner continues carrying much of the emotional weight, the relationship keeps functioning because someone is constantly repairing misunderstandings, reopening conversations, offering forgiveness, and creating opportunities for connection. That steady emotional investment quietly holds the relationship together. As long as that support continues, the avoidant partner may never have to fully confront the fears or emotional conflicts hidden beneath the surface. They can continue relying on familiar coping habits without realizing how much emotional work someone else has been doing. In many cases, the empathetic partner provides far more than affection. They offer understanding during difficult moments, patience after emotional withdrawal, reassurance during uncertainty, and consistency even when the relationship feels one-sided. Over time, that dependable presence can begin to feel permanent. Without intending to, the avoidant partner may assume this support will always remain available. They stop questioning whether it could disappear because it has always been there. But no one has unlimited emotional energy. Eventually, even the most patient person can become emotionally exhausted. And when that happens, the relationship often reaches a turning point that neither person expected. Then something changes almost without warning. The empathetic partner becomes quieter, not because they suddenly stop caring, not because they want revenge or wish to create guilt. They simply reach a place where they no longer have the energy to carry both their own emotions and someone else's at the same time. Their silence is different from anger. It comes from exhaustion rather than resentment. Without saying very much, that silence communicates something powerful. I cannot keep doing this alone. For the avoidant partner, this can feel unfamiliar. The emotional rhythm they had grown accustomed to suddenly changes. The reassurance is no longer automatic. The repeated attempts to reconnect become less frequent. The emotional safety net they quietly relied upon is no longer there in the same way. At first, they may believe it is temporary. They may expect everything to return to normal after a little time passes. But as the silence continues, new emotions may begin surfacing. Confusion replaces certainty. Loneliness slowly replaces relief. Questions begin appearing where confidence once existed. Without someone constantly restoring emotional balance, they may find themselves facing thoughts and feelings they had successfully avoided for a long time. This process is often invisible from the outside. Friends and family may notice nothing unusual at all. Yet internally, the emotional landscape can begin shifting in ways the avoidant person never anticipated. For many people with avoidant patterns, emotional distance once felt like protection. Independence felt safer than vulnerability. Staying emotionally guarded seemed easier than risking disappointment or rejection. But when someone who consistently provided patience, understanding, and emotional stability quietly steps away, that familiar distance can begin feeling very different. What once felt safe may gradually begin feeling empty. The silence that once protected them no longer keeps uncomfortable emotions away. Instead, it creates enough stillness for old fears, buried insecurities, unresolved wounds, and the desire for genuine connection to become harder to ignore. None of this happens because silence itself creates change. It happens because there is no longer another person carrying the emotional work that once kept difficult feelings beneath the surface. Slowly, the avoidant person may begin recognizing what the relationship actually provided beyond companionship. They may realize that consistent kindness, emotional patience, and dependable support were never guaranteed. They may also discover that real connection requires mutual emotional participation rather than one person doing all the work. This realization does not automatically repair the relationship, nor does it guarantee reconciliation, but it can become the beginning of greater self-awareness. Sometimes the most important lesson arrives only after the familiar pattern finally stops repeating. And for both people, that moment becomes an opportunity to choose healthier ways of relating, whether together or apart. For many people with avoidant patterns, silence becomes more than the absence of conversation. It can become a way of calming an overwhelmed nervous system, creating distance from emotions that feel confusing, or stepping away from situations that seem emotionally intense. From the outside, this withdrawal may look like confidence or control. Internally, however, it is often an attempt to restore a sense of emotional balance. By stepping back, they may feel they are managing the pace of the relationship and protecting themselves from vulnerability. While this pattern continues, the other person often responds in the opposite way. The empathetic partner moves closer instead of farther away. They offer reassurance when communication fades. They express care when silence appears. Each time emotional distance grows, they work even harder to rebuild connection. Over time, this creates a familiar rhythm. The avoidant partner withdraws, and the empathetic partner fills the empty space with patience, understanding, and emotional effort. Without realizing it, both people become part of the same cycle. As long as someone continues repairing every emotional gap, the avoidant partner may never experience the full impact of repeatedly creating distance. It can begin to feel as though the relationship will always recover because someone else is carrying so much of its emotional weight. Stay with me, because this is where the dynamic quietly begins to change. Eventually, something different happens. The empathetic partner becomes quiet, not because they have suddenly stopped caring or because they want revenge. More often, they have simply reached the limits of what they can continue giving. Emotional exhaustion slowly replaces constant effort. They realize they cannot keep speaking into silence forever. They cannot continue explaining themselves to someone who seems unable or unwilling to meet them in the middle. Their quietness does not come from anger alone. It comes from recognizing that caring should not require abandoning themselves. When that shift happens, the emotional pattern changes completely. The silence no longer belongs only to the avoidant partner. Now both people have stepped back, but for very different reasons. For the empathetic partner, the quiet represents self-protection and healing. For the avoidant partner, it may begin feeling unfamiliar. The emotional space that once felt manageable can slowly become uncomfortable because the reassuring presence they quietly relied upon is no longer filling every gap. Without constant reassurance, they may begin noticing emotions that were previously pushed aside. Questions appear where certainty once existed. Loneliness begins replacing emotional relief. What once felt like control may now feel like uncertainty. This change is rarely dramatic. It usually unfolds quietly over time as the emotional environment becomes completely different from what both people had grown accustomed to. The deeper realization often comes later. Many avoidant individuals eventually discover that emotional distance was never the same as emotional freedom. Sometimes it's simply postponed feelings that had not yet been fully faced. Without another person constantly repairing misunderstandings, offering forgiveness, or rebuilding closeness after every withdrawal, they may finally encounter thoughts they had spent years avoiding. Old insecurities become more noticeable. Fear of rejection feels more real. The desire for genuine connection becomes harder to dismiss. Regret may also appear, not because silence itself caused it, but because there is finally enough stillness to recognize what the relationship had quietly provided. The empathetic partner's consistency was never simply affection. It offered emotional stability, patience, and acceptance that often softened experiences the avoidant partner struggled to face alone. When that steady presence is no longer available, the emotional landscape changes in profound ways. The relationship is no longer buffered by someone else's constant effort. At that point, many people begin realizing that healthy relationships cannot survive on one person's emotional labor forever. Lasting connection requires both people to participate in building trust, communicating honestly, and facing vulnerability together. This realization does not automatically repair the relationship, nor does it guarantee reconciliation, but it can become an important turning point for personal growth because genuine emotional strength is not found in building higher walls. It grows through learning to remain emotionally present, even when vulnerability feels uncomfortable. One of the hardest truths is that many avoidant patterns develop as protection from emotional pain, rather than a desire to avoid love itself. These coping strategies often begin early in life, when closeness felt unpredictable, overwhelming, or emotionally unsafe. Over time, withdrawing, becoming quiet, or disconnecting emotionally can begin feeling like the safest response available. As long as someone else continues carrying much of the emotional responsibility, those protective habits may never be questioned. But when that familiar support quietly disappears, there are fewer distractions left. The silence becomes an opportunity to notice feelings that have been waiting beneath the surface all along. Instead of focusing entirely on the relationship, attention gradually turns inward. Questions arise about old wounds, fears of vulnerability, unresolved insecurity, and deeply held beliefs about whether lasting connection is truly safe. These are not easy questions, and there are rarely quick answers. Yet this inward reflection often becomes the beginning of genuine healing. Real growth does not happen because another person keeps chasing or because silence becomes a competition. It begins when someone becomes willing to understand the emotional patterns they have carried for years and slowly replace them with healthier ways of connecting. That journey requires honesty, patience, and courage, but it is also where meaningful change becomes possible. These are not simply passing worries or ordinary moments of self-doubt. They are often deeply rooted beliefs that can develop during early life when emotional safety felt uncertain or inconsistent. Facing those beliefs can feel overwhelming because they challenge the very foundation of how a person has learned to protect themselves. As long as the empathetic partner continued offering warmth, understanding, patience, and emotional connection, the avoidant partner often had little reason to examine those hidden fears. Much of the emotional stability within the relationship was quietly supported by someone willing to keep reaching out, repairing misunderstandings, and creating opportunities for closeness. But when that familiar support gradually disappears, the emotional landscape begins to change. Silence has a way of revealing what constant activity once concealed. Without someone continuously restoring the relationship, emotions that were buried beneath everyday routines may slowly rise to the surface. Feelings of loneliness, regret, uncertainty, fear, sadness, and unresolved pain can become much more difficult to ignore. Old emotional wounds that were never fully processed may begin demanding attention. This experience can feel deeply unsettling, not because those emotions suddenly appeared, but because there are fewer distractions keeping them out of awareness. Stay with me, because this is where many people begin understanding what emotional avoidance has been protecting all along. When emotional distance is no longer balanced by another person's constant reassurance, the avoidant partner may begin noticing the consequences of patterns they once considered protective. The silence no longer feels like complete freedom. Instead, it creates room for reflection. They may recognize moments when they withdrew instead of communicating, protected themselves instead of becoming vulnerable, or allowed fear to shape decisions that affected someone they genuinely cared about. None of these realizations happen all at once. They usually unfold quietly during ordinary moments when there is finally enough stillness to think. The explanations that once felt convincing may no longer provide the same comfort. Staying busy becomes less effective at distracting from unresolved emotions. The familiar routines that once created emotional distance no longer remove the underlying questions. Instead, attention gradually turns inward. Many people eventually discover that what they were trying hardest to avoid was not another person, but the discomfort of being fully known, emotionally open, and vulnerable. Recognizing that truth can be painful because it asks them to reconsider beliefs they have relied upon for years. Yet this awareness also creates an opportunity for meaningful growth. The emotional barriers that once seemed necessary may begin looking less like strength and more like protection built for a different stage of life. This internal process rarely looks dramatic from the outside. There are often no emotional confrontations or obvious signs that something significant is happening. Instead, the real struggle unfolds privately. It happens during quiet evenings, long drives, sleepless nights, or ordinary moments when there is no conversation to distract from personal reflection. Questions begin appearing that may never have been asked before. Why do meaningful relationships keep following the same pattern? Why does closeness become uncomfortable? What am I protecting myself from? Those questions are rarely easy to answer because they often lead back to experiences that shaped emotional habits many years earlier. For someone whose identity has been built around self-protection, confronting these deeper truths can feel overwhelming. Yet genuine healing often begins with exactly this kind of honest self-examination. It is not the silence itself that creates change. It is the opportunity the silence provides to finally notice what has been avoided for so long. Without constant emotional distractions, many people begin recognizing both the relationships they have lost and the emotional needs they have never fully acknowledged. This process is difficult, but it can become the beginning of greater emotional maturity rather than simply another cycle of withdrawal. Many avoidant patterns continue because familiar relationship dynamics quietly reinforce them. If someone repeatedly withdraws and another person consistently follows, reassures, forgives, and restores connection, both individuals gradually become accustomed to those roles. The avoidant partner may come to expect that distance will always be followed by another opportunity to reconnect without addressing the underlying issues. The empathetic partner, meanwhile, may continue carrying more and more of the emotional responsibility until the weight eventually becomes unsustainable. Then something unexpected happens. The pursuit stops. Not because love has disappeared, but because emotional exhaustion has reached its limit. The empathetic partner no longer feels able to continue repairing every rupture alone. Their quietness is not revenge or punishment. It is an expression of emotional reality. They recognize that genuine connection requires participation from both people. This unexpected change often interrupts the familiar relationship pattern in a powerful way. Instead of another attempt to close the distance, there is space. Instead of emotional urgency, there is calm acceptance. That shift can be deeply surprising because it no longer matches the expectations built through years of repeating the same cycle. The silence becomes a mirror rather than a weapon. It reflects the relationship exactly as it is, without excuses or emotional noise. For both people, this moment creates an opportunity to see the relationship more clearly than ever before. Whether that clarity eventually leads to reconciliation or separate paths depends not on silence alone, but on each person's willingness to recognize old patterns, take responsibility for their own growth, and build healthier ways of connecting in the future. The pain created by his resistance, the hidden wounds born from his fear, everything rises to the surface. He begins to fall apart in this moment because the silence tears down every protective story he spent years believing. Once she stops chasing him, he can no longer hide behind the familiar belief he always repeated to himself, the belief that no one had ever truly loved him. Then, in the middle of that silence, something changes. A memory returns. Someone really did love him. Someone cared with complete honesty and never demanded anything in return. Someone kept making room for patience and understanding. Someone saw his struggles, offered comfort, and gave warmth without expecting equal effort back. Yet, even with all of that, he still walked away. Inside the quiet, he finally realizes that running never protected him. It destroyed the one thing he was most afraid to lose. His fear came with an unbearable cost. He lost the one person who truly valued him. This truth does not arrive softly. It hits like a silent earthquake deep inside his emotions. He starts replaying every moment when she loved him without asking for anything. The kindness she showed, the patience she carried, the way she tried to understand the emotions he could never explain. He remembers messages he ignored, acts of love he brushed aside, and chances for real closeness that he refused. His mind rebuilds every memory as if he is seeing it for the very first time. Stay with me, because what happens next changes everything. As he watches those moments again inside his mind, he notices something he completely missed before. She loved him through the hard days, through every wall between them, through every fear that kept pushing him away. That realization hurts far more than the separation itself, because now he does not only understand that he lost her, he finally understands exactly why, not because her love became weaker, but because he never allowed himself to fully receive it. Not because she expected too much, but because he kept giving too little in return. The silence proves that nobody forced him to leave. He slowly created that distance himself. He built the separation he now grieves every single day. Accepting that truth hurts more than any argument ever could. His breaking point is not loud. It happens quietly. It happens alone. It appears late at night, early in the morning, and during ordinary moments when the truth crashes into him without warning. Regret replaces the pride he once held onto. Longing replaces the emotional distance he once believed was strength. He imagines what could have happened if he had stayed, if he had opened his heart, if he had tried harder, if he had truly paid attention. He wishes he had not mistaken fear for wisdom. He spent years convincing himself he was protecting his heart. He believed he was keeping himself safe. He believed he was staying in control of his own story. But there is one truth he never saw until everything was already gone. Avoidance never protects anything. It quietly tears everything apart. The moment her silence arrives, it brings painful clarity with it. He is finally forced to face something he spent years avoiding. The closeness he feared was never what hurt him. The real pain came from always running, from locking away his own emotions, from refusing to let himself fully receive the love that was offered without conditions. He finally sees the truth. His choices did not stop heartbreak. They created it. He was never escaping pain. He was only delaying it. He was making it stronger. He was leaving all of it for this silent moment that could no longer be avoided. And eventually, that silence reaches him. His world begins to fall apart because he realizes he gave away the one thing he secretly wanted all along. People who avoid closeness still deeply want real love. They simply struggle to believe it can last. They crave connection, yet fear keeps standing in the way. When she disappears, he is left inside the emptiness his own actions created. The silence he once chose becomes the silence that now surrounds him. Suddenly, every wall he built for protection begins to feel like a prison. The barriers he created become smaller and heavier because nothing warm reaches him anymore. She is no longer there to soften the distance, calm the fear, or bring light into his emotional confusion. For the first time, he clearly sees what his behavior truly accomplished. His defenses never protected the relationship. They slowly took it apart piece by piece. His emotional distance never kept him safe.